SAS was working with us. So the Brits had joined the fight now, and they had a contingent, a tier 1 asset in country, and they were doing targets and we were doing targets basically all over the country. And we were in Fallujah this night, and they had a block and we had a block chasing some high value targets in Fallujah. And they ended up, drawing the short straw on the blocks, and they were manually breaching the gate of a house to get into the courtyard, and all hell broke loose. House full of bad guys. I mean, RPGs and machine guns lined up on the roof. Like, it was bad timing. The Brits took some casualties in that initial engagement. We ended up covering their exfil of those casualties and withdrawal from that space from across the street. I was on the rooftop of the building across the street. We had Bradley's tanks in blocking positions. And rather than just go heavy and try to assault this house that was obviously heavily fortified and heavily armed and full of bad guys, we started shooting tow missiles from the Bradleys into this house. And we had a couple of little birds in support, so a lot of 275 rocket, a lot of machine gun into this building. I think we shot 11 tow missiles into the building. Middle Eastern buildings are notoriously resilient, as a lot of us know. So, there's some holes in the fence, there was a lot of holes in the house. Every time they would shoot more rounds, it would be quiet for a minute, and then a bunch of, rounds would come out, it would erupt again, and that went on for some time. But eventually we got to the point where we had shot all the tow missiles, and the little birds ran out of ammo, and we're like, all right, well, we gotta go assault this house, because that's what we do. So we did. There was a funny moment out front where we tried to send the dog in, just to see if anybody was still up and moving around, and it was early on in the dog days. And the dog, teammate and I, my team, we drew the short straw and were the first ones to enter this compound. And so I'm standing behind my 2IC at the gate, and Mikey actually called for it. He's like, let's send the dog in and see what happens. And so one of the dog handlers sent the dog in. He went in the courtyard, we can't see him. A couple of minutes go by, he comes back out, nothing. We're like, and Mikey's like, send him again. Dog goes again. A couple minutes go by, he comes out, nothing. No barking, we don't hear anything. We're like, that's weird. Tried it one more time, still nothing. I think we tried 3 times. Well, hindsight, what we found out was the dog was going into the courtyard. He was getting tangled up in all the tow missile wire that was laying on the ground. And they had never dealt with that. So the dog would get all tangled up in the wiring that was laying on the ground in the courtyard, and he would get confused and he would just come back out instead of going into the house, because they'd never dealt with it. So they'd never trained the dogs to deal with obstacles en route to make an entry into a building or whatever. I was never a dog guy, so forgive me, dog guys, if you get the point.
Yeah.
And so at that point, Mikey leaned over my shoulder and he was like, you got a flashbang? And I pulled one off his back and he went, fuck it. And I threw the flashbang over his shoulder in the courtyard. We made entry. One of the teams ended up killing a guy that was still alive in the house. And then we cleared the first floor, started to go to the second floor, and there was a suspected IED on the landing on your way up to the second floor. Protocol was to get out of the building, so there's a code word that we used to get out of the building. So they called that code word thinking the building was rigged. Even then we were paying attention, and it was before any of that had ever happened. So we exited out of the building, ended up clearing the building next door, going up to the roof, and there were still guys alive on the roof. We ended up engaging. My team ended up on the roof of the building next door, ended up engaging those guys. And at the same time, the Brits had gotten back in the fight. And we're coming up the backside, and they were pissed. They'd lost a couple mates. They were like, wall charge, grenade in courtyards, grenade in rooms. Like, they were full blown. It doesn't matter who you are, you're dying. And they made entry in the house behind us, came up onto the roof. And I see tack lights. So 22 SAS wasn't running nods back then, which is insane.
No shit.
No shit. Tack light, no nods.
Wow.
No nods, no lasers. Yeah, 2003. And so their wall charge, entry, frag, enter rooms. They end up in the house behind us. They come up. I see the tack light coming up the stairwell, and I'm yelling across the rooftops, "Eagle, eagle, eagle!" And I get an answer back, "Right, eagle, eagle." I'm like, "Cool, they know we're here." And I made a mistake. I go, "Hey, whatever you do, don't throw a frag. There's ordnance all over the roof." You know what's coming. The call that came back to me was, "Right, mate, frag out." Grenade comes out on the roof. Brad and I both hit the deck. Luckily, it didn't set off any of the RPGs or anything that were sitting up there. But yeah, so what ended up coming out of that was the SSE of that target, after everybody was killed, they were all wearing like tracksuits, like somebody had, like out of a movie, like someone had given them clothes. In the house was nothing but like sleeping mats, some food and water, and ammo. And what it was the first foreign fighter target we ever experienced. So they were guys that had been brought in through what eventually became the rat lines coming from Syria into Iraq, through western Iraq, and then into the cities. And so they were the first true foreigners that we ever encountered, and to my knowledge, they were the first ones that were encountered in Iraq. And that was a weird moment because it was early in the war, like we hadn't even caught Saddam yet. But it was a really good snapshot of things to come.